the stillness of a Pennsylvania winter, a girl stood barefoot in the snow, eyes open but not seeing, mouth closed but humming a song no one taught her. She had not spoken in 13 days. Her name was Emma Richter. Age 9. Location Ravenslock Township. Year, what happened to her remains unclear. She did not vanish. She remained in her parents' home, seated often in corners, humming a minor key melody that caused dogs to whine and the wind to still. When they tried to stop her, the clocks in the house stopped too. The fire would hiss and recoil. The mirror in her bedroom fog over with handprints no one could explain. She didn't speak, but she remembered things she could not have known, such as the preacher's wife's secret miscarriage, or a fire that would not happen until the following spring. Emma was not sick, not dead, not entirely alive. She was other, and as the months wore on, the line between the known and the unknowable blurred until her small frame became the center of something deeper than science, more ancient than medicine. This is her story. Ravenslock did not appear on most maps, not in 1873, not even in the years that followed. It was a whisper of a place, cradled deep in the fog-wrapped hollows of Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, where the pines grew tall and too close together, and the wind never moved in a straight line. Founded in silence by Prussian Lutherans escaping war and memory, Ravenslock was not built to be seen. It was carved into frost-hardened ground and wrapped in a stillness that even birds seemed to respect. There were no post offices, no schoolhouses, no marked graves, only a cluster of weather-worn homes and barns, stitched together by dirt paths and Lutheran scripture. The Richters arrived in the spring of 1866, stern, devout, weathered like the beams of the farmhouse they would build. Wilhelm was a stoic man, his voice low, his eyes always scanning the tree line as if expecting something to step through it. Hannah was younger by 10 years, quiet, prone to dream. Her diary, which surfaced decades later, described Ravenslock as a place where God does not speak but listens. The townspeople kept to themselves. There were no dances, no music, no laughter that carried. What did travel were stories passed in muttered German, over cracked mugs of coffee, always after the children had gone to bed. Don't enter the woods past sundown. Don't follow the fog. And if you hear someone call your name, don't answer. They said the trees there leaned too close together, and that sometimes their roots moved when no wind stirred. Old men who no longer walked without assistance, spoke of a shadow that moved faster than a man could run. They called it Holzatem. Emma Richter was born into this world of hush and half-remembered warnings. A Sunday child, born just before the sky broke with thunder. The midwife was a stout woman named Martha Weiss, who had delivered more than 30 children in the region. But Emma's birth was different. Hannah bled for 7 hours. The child did not cry. When she finally opened her eyes, Martha would later say, after a few cups of schnapps, that Emma blinked not in confusion but in recognition. Like she'd seen it all before, she whispered. Like she knew where she'd come to. The Richters, of course, said nothing. The neighbors sent bread and prayers, and the fog continued to roll in from the trees, thicker that year than ever before. As Emma grew, she spoke little. She played her toys were smooth stones, bits of ribbon, and scraps of lace she would braid into the beams of the cellar. At 5, she stopped speaking altogether. Not out of trauma. Simply stopped. No tantrums. No illness. Just silence. She watches too hard, said old Frau Dietz, who lived down the slope. Children blink. Children forget. That one never does. Hannah began to age quickly. Her diary turned erratic. She wrote of dreams she did not understand. Of Emma walking backward through their home, touching the walls with closed eyes, whispering in a tongue Hannah didn't know. The air shifts when she moves, Hannah once wrote. Like the house is remembering something. By the time Emma was 9, the town had learned not to mention her. She was seen but never spoken of. A girl-shaped silence in a place already swallowed by quiet. And then came October 9th, the day the clocks stopped, the day the humming began, and the day Ravenslock crossed an invisible threshold from forgotten settlement into whispered legend. It was the first frost of the season, but no snow had yet fallen. The morning light on October 9, 1873 crawled across the Parson household in half-lit silence, as if the sun itself hesitated. Emma was gone. At first Wilhelm thought she'd risen early, a girl of quiet habits and stranger moods. She often wandered into the orchard or sat for hours in the barn loft sketching shadows. But by mid-morning her absence soured into dread. Her mother, Helena, searched the kitchen garden, hands trembling over the rosemary and mint. Wilhelm called for the farm hands, his voice rising with every echo that came back empty. 3 hours passed. Then something drew Wilhelm to the root cellar. No one remembered hearing a door creak. No one remembered leaving it open. The iron handle was cold. He descended with a lantern and the cold stung his lungs. She was there, Emma, barefoot, her nightgown damp and clinging, her fingers spread flat against the stone wall as if trying to feel through it. She did not turn when her father called her name. The flame in his lantern flickered violently, dancing sideways without wind. Emma? No answer, not a blink, not even a breath visible in the chill. Her eyes were open but seemed to look inward. She did not speak. Not then. Not again for months. Later that morning, Wilhelm noticed the grandfather clock in the parlor had stopped. He went to wind it, only to find it had already been wound. The minute hand was fixed at exactly 3:17, and the old pocket watch that belonged to Wilhelm's father, kept in a drawer since his death, had stopped too. 3:17 a.m. Precisely. The clocks refused to tick again within the house, but when the pocket watch was taken to town for repairs, it began ticking immediately, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. Back in the house, the ticking died the moment it crossed the threshold. The dog wouldn't go near Emma. Rufus, a sturdy mastiff, had slept beside her bed since she was an infant, but now he whined and cowered beneath the stairs. When forced into the same room, he growled low and steady, as though something unseen had taken her shape. Candles sputtered around her, even behind closed windows. Their flames danced sideways or extinguished altogether. Helena lit prayer candles in Emma's room. Each morning they were found melted into odd shapes, wax curling like claws. Then the humming began. Soft, persistent, a melody with no clear origin or key, rhythmic, like a lullaby. But it was dissonant, wrong. It had the cadence of memory but none of the comfort. And it did not stop. You could feel it, said Dr. Adley, a local physician who kept records of the event. Not in your ears, in your teeth, in the bones of your face. He found no fever, no trauma, no sign of injury or harm, just silence and humming. She was somewhere else. He later wrote in a letter to his colleague in Albany, not asleep, not conscious, but gone, as though her mind had stepped into another room and left the door open. Villagers began to whisper. Some claimed she had wandered into the forest during the witching hour and been claimed. Others said the girl had been born with a veil, destined to see what should remain hidden. An old widow brought a rosary and left it by Emma's bed. By morning it had unraveled into knots too complex to untangle. Wilhelm, usually a man of industry and science, stopped sleeping. He sat beside her bed listening to the humming until his face grew gaunt and gray. His journals from that month are filled with erratic scrawl. She hums in sleep, she hums in silence. Is it song? Is it language? Clocks. Always clocks. Time unraveled. What happened at 3:17? The melody does not end. It folds in on itself like breath caught in a loop. He built a fire each night in the hearth and whispered to it. If you're in there, he said once, give her back. But the fire only cracked and the clocks remained still. And Emma hummed. At first it was barely audible, a low vibration, like the murmuring of bees in a distant field. But this sound carried through plaster and brick, seeping from the seams of the house like breath through cracked lips. It began, the family said 3 nights after the clock stopped. It's in the walls, Emma whispered, pressing her ear against the wooden paneling. It's remember. Her mother dismissed it at first. Old houses shift, she muttered, lighting another candle to chase the damp corners from the kitchen. But the sound wasn't the groaning of timber, or the moan of wind through cracks. This was rhythmic, intentional. The humming came at night, soft, At first, then swelling like something summoned. And always, it began in the same place, the east wall of Emma's room, just beneath the narrow wooden crucifix. Neighbors said they heard nothing, but the farmhands, those who slept in the loft above the kitchen, began to whisper. One, a boy no older than 17, claimed he woke with blood running from both ears. Another said he dreamed of locusts crawling through the rafters. And then came the morning when Miss Devine, the housemaid, stood stock still by the cellar door, her hands trembling. It's humming scripture, she said, pale as the dead, but backwards. Mrs. Harper, a stout woman who once baked bread for the entire parish, soon stopped using the kitchen altogether. It turns bitter, she told the vicar. The moment she hums, that girl, it turned. They tried silence. For 3 days, no one sang, spoke above a whisper, or played the old piano in the parlor. But the humming didn't stop. It simply waited. Then came the cracks, tiny at first, spiderwebbing across the parlor window, threading their way through teacups and mirror glass. Emma sat perfectly still as a jagged split unfurled down the stem of her porcelain doll. It never shattered, just split, delicate, like a fracture in time. One by one, every surface that had once reflected her face began to fracture. Mirrors, saucers, even the polished brass handle on her music box, the one with the ballerina who no longer turned. When the humming paused, the house groaned like an old man released from confession. A carpenter from town, Harold Quinn, known for fixing stained glass in the chapel, was summoned. He stepped into the threshold, stood for half a minute, then turned on his heel. It's not a sound, he muttered, wiping his hands with shaking fingers. It's a remembering. What do you mean? Asked the father, more impatient now than fearful. But Quinn only looked toward Emma's window. That wall, he said. Something old is buried in it. They knocked on it. Nothing hollow, nothing strange, just plaster, and old pine slats beneath. But Emma would wake some nights with a voice in her head. Not hers, not anyone, just a whisper. You are the echo. And the next day, always, a new crack would appear. The doctor came. He said it was pressure, or perhaps damp, or nerves. Girls at that age feel the world in stranger ways than we do, he said with a polite smile. But the vicar disagreed. He brought holy water, recited Latin in rooms that hadn't been opened since Emma's birth. In the attic, he claimed, the crucifix over the storage chest turned black. No one else saw it, but the next morning, the chest was split straight down the center, like a tree struck by lightning. It's not possession, the vicar whispered to Mrs. Harper. It's grief, echoed too long. It wants to be known. And still the humming continued. Neither melody nor moan, but something beneath both, a resonance, like memory filtered through wood and tar. One evening, the sun setting behind gray hills, Emma placed her hand against the east wall. Why do you hum? She asked aloud. There was no reply, only a breath, deep and slow like the house exhaling. Outside, the crows scattered. Inside, another crack appeared, this time in the chapel glass, where the angel's face once was. The town began to whisper. Then about the girl with the house that remembered, about the walls that sang back, and about sound, what it really is, not just air but memory, repeating until someone listens. They say curiosity has a scent like old parchment and wood smoke. When word of Emma Richter traveled beyond the hollows and ridgelines of Harrowwick, it drifted like incense across pews, through rectories into the hands of those who studied not just the scriptures, but the strange. Dr. Matthias Kale arrived in the fall of. He stepped off the coach with a cane carved from cherry wood, and a satchel of brittle books. A Lutheran scholar by title, though most whispered he dealt more with dead languages than the living. He'd once catalogued the hymns of plague churches in East Prussia, and was rumored to have lived alone in a bell tower for a season, recording echoes, tall, dry, and meticulous. Kale looked less like a man and more like a walking obituary. He did not smile when the Richters greeted him, only observed his pale eyes resting too long on Emma. She was in the orchard, swaying between the apple trees, not dancing, drifting. I heard of the girls humming, he said, but not of the way the air changes when she's near. He stayed in the attic above the barn by his own request. He said it was important not to sleep beneath the same beams she did. The second night he brought in a heavy oak phonograph, dusty, German-made. He placed its horn toward the kitchen and gathered the family clothes. Emma watched from a stool barefoot, her hands limp in her lap. Dr. Cale pulled a record from a leather sleeve, thick, uneven, made of shellac. This, he said, brushing it clean with a cloth, is a funeral hymn, not sung in over 200 years. The dialect was lost before Napoleon ever marched. He wound the crank, the room filled with a low, mournful drone like a church singing to itself in the fog. The vocals were cracked, time-worn, but hauntingly intact. A minor key, elongated vowel, a music that did not ask to be heard but endured anyway. Emma rose. Her mother reached for her arm, but the girl stepped forward, her lips parted, and she hummed. Emma was born 2 years later. By the week's end, more names followed. A man named Adler who died in a mining collapse in 1912. A girl named Louisa who fell into the well behind the original schoolhouse in 1899. Emma spoke their names in sleep and sometimes during waking trances, her voice distant, detached, as if repeating memories that were not hers. Dr. Halbrecht, who had been documenting Emma's case since the beginning, kept a leather notebook weathered and smudged, filled with every utterance, date and death. He double-checked them all. County death records, obituaries, family ledgers. They were all real, and every name she spoke belonged to someone long dead. A visiting anthropologist from Vienna, Dr. Petra Klein, came after hearing of Emma's gift, or curse. She had studied ancestral memory, and claimed that traumas, fears, even dreams could pass through generations like blood. She is not calling the dead, Petra said after one interview. She is remembering them, but others were not so convinced. Father Moser, the parish priest, refused to step into the family's home after Emma murmured the name of a child who had died in his parish, one he'd buried, quietly, without a record at the request of the grieving mother. No one knows of that death, he whispered, pale and trembling. No one, not even the Vatican. Some called it necromancy. Others believed she was touched by spirits, or perhaps had become a conduit for the forgotten. Rumors began to spread that the girl could speak to the dead, that she had no soul of her own. The villagers avoided her. Mothers tugged their children to the other side of the road. Shopkeepers grew silent when she entered. Candles flickered out in her presence. Still, the names came. One name, Johann Escher, stood out, a piano teacher from 1872 who reportedly vanished without a trace. Emma described his hands in vivid detail, noted a scar on his left wrist, and claimed he had died with a hymn stuck in his throat. She even hummed the melody. It matched an unpublished piece found in Escher's journal, held in the archives of a forgotten university in Graz. Though she knew it, no one could say. There were no recordings, no public scores. Petra wrote in her journal, "She doesn't remember people, she remembers pain." Final thoughts. Echoes. One night, Emma whispered in her sleep, "They don't know they're dead. Not until I say their name." Dr. Halbrecht asked her the next morning what she meant. Emma only blinked. "They live in the silence, until someone remembers." The weight of her knowledge began to bear down. Her eyes grew more distant, her voice more hollow, as if each name took something from her. And still she never once named the living, only the lost. Outside their home, birds no longer nested. Dogs howled without cause, mirrors cracked without being touched, and at dusk, when the light was softest, Emma sat near the old sycamore and hummed forgotten hymns, watching shadows dance beneath the branches. They say if you sat quietly beside her, you could hear the names too. Names you hadn't thought of in years, names you had no memory of, names that somehow remembered you. March 1874. Pine Hollow had only just begun to thaw. The last of the winter frost still clung to the eaves and shaded corners of the village, refusing to let go. But inside the Langenfeld house, the cold had found a new, more intimate dwelling. Emma. She was found before dawn by her mother, soaked in sweat as if she'd run for miles. Her linen gown clung to her skin, and her hair was plastered across her forehead. But when Marie touched her daughter's cheek, she recoiled. It was cold, ice cold. The doctor Jacob Eisen, arrived before the sun fully crested the ridge. His hands trembled as he placed the mercury thermometer beneath Emma's tongue. 93, he whispered, staring in disbelief. This is not a fever. It is hypothermia. And yet her body steamed. Mist coiled from her arms and neck like breath on a winter morning. The room was warm. The fire in the hearth had burned all night. Still, Emma shivered. Then she mumbled, "Not in German. Not in Latin." It sounded like Aramaic. Dr. Eisen stepped back. Marie made the sign of the cross, and the priest, who had insisted on staying the night just in case, closed his eyes. "The tongue of prophets," he whispered, "or demons." For 3 days Emma did not hum. The absence was unsettling. The house, which had become a kind of echo chamber of low, vibrating sound, fell into stillness. The air lost its tension. Windows no longer groaned. The clocks resumed their ticking, and for the first time in months, the Langenfelds dared to hope. Marie stitched curtains. Adalbert mended the roof. Life attempted to resume its rightful shape as if the silence was a return, not a retreat. But then came the 4th night. A storm began without warning. No clouds, no wind, just a sudden, strange compression of the air, like something unseen had taken a deep breath. Then sound. All the windows cracked, not shattered, not broken, cracked. Each pane split from corner to corner, the lines forming a web of silent destruction. The glass did not fall, nor did it tremble. It simply cracked as though something ancient had placed a finger against it and pressed very gently. Then came the photograph. It hung above the fireplace, a black and white family portrait taken 2 winters prior. The faces were stiff, unsmiling. Emma's eyes had always looked elsewhere. That night, the photo detached from the nail. It landed face up on the floor. Emma's face was gone, and then the humming returned. But it was different now, louder, not in volume but in presence. It no longer filled corners, it filled thought. It coiled through the spine like a memory of pain or the echo of a name you once knew but had long forgotten. Dr. Eisen never returned. He wrote a single note, found folded beneath the inkwell on his desk. We mistook silence for healing, but some fires burn cold. Marie kept the torn photograph in a box beneath her bed, wrapped in cloth and rosemary. Sometimes she would unwrap it and stare at the blank space where her daughter's face should be. But Albert stopped speaking altogether. And Emma, she kept humming. She hummed through spring, through the budding of trees, through the return of birdsong. And the village began to wonder, was the silence a mercy, or just the breath before the storm? He arrived under a low sky, gray and hushed, as if the heavens themselves were bracing for something unspeakable. Dr. Johann Blas stepped off the eastbound train in a tailored coat still dusted with the snow of Vienna. He carried with him a leather medical case, a small journal, and the confidence of a man who had studied the mind more than he had lived inside his own. He did not believe in hauntings or hysteria. He believed in neurons, lesions, language centers, all things that could be charted, categorized, named. When he arrived at the Briar House, the wind picked up. A flock of crows turned in unison above the trees, circling once, then vanishing beyond the ridge. "Dr. Blas," said Margaret Holloway, her voice dry from sleeplessness, "we're told you're the best." He nodded, his blue eyes surveying the dim corridor behind her. "Science does not have a best, only a next." Emma was waiting. She had not spoken in days. Not since the fever broke and the house began to hold its breath. But when Blas entered her room, the oil lamp flickered, not out, but sideways, as if something unseen had passed between the two. He made notes. Pulse, low, eyes, tracking but unfocused, skin, unusually cool. He jotted it all down in quiet cursive. "A typical presentation of postictal catatonia," he murmured. Then, without prompting, Emma turned her head. Her gaze fell upon his gloved hand as he adjusted her pillow. She reached up, not violently, not suddenly, but with eerie grace. Her fingers touched the back of his hand. Cold meeting cold, and then she whispered, "Anna." Blas froze. The room did not move, nor did the candle flame. He looked down. "What did you say?" Emma blinked, then smiled faintly, like a child remembering the end of a dream. "Anna." Blas. She forgives you." The physician stood upright. All color left his face. Anna Blas had died in 1854. A quiet drowning. Ice beneath a lake. A sister buried under the weight of winter and memory. Her name had never crossed a page of public record, never passed his lips in lecture halls or parlors. He had buried her deeply, first in soil, then in silence. He left the house that night. No goodbyes. No explanation. He boarded the same eastbound train just before midnight, refusing the tea offered by the station master. In his satchel, the journal lay open to a single page, where he had scrawled one line: "The mind cannot create what it has never been fed. So how does she know what I forgot?" He would never return to America. His report was never published. The pages of observation were burned in a stove by spring. But one letter survived, tucked in the archives of an old medical university in Krakow. Undated, unsigned, but unmistakably his. In it he writes, "There are rooms in the human brain that no science has ever mapped. Some doors only open when belief is abandoned, and some when guilt walks in first." In Briar House the silence resumed. Emma had not spoken again, not a word. But Margaret would later swear that for a brief moment, just before dawn, she saw Emma's breath misting in the cold air, though the room was warm, and in the frost on the window pane, a name appeared, just for a moment, and then it was gone. Anna. As if it too had been waiting for absolution. There are moments in history that slip through the cracks, small and strange, yet impossibly loud in the echo they leave behind. This was one of them. The day music came to the hollow house on Whitlow Hill, the world tilted sideways and never quite corrected itself. It began on a Tuesday. By then, Emma had long since stopped speaking. But she had not stopped humming. The sound was quiet, nearly imperceptible at first. A low, tremulous hum, neither cheerful nor mournful. Just persistent. It threaded through the halls like fog, slipping beneath door frames, curling up the staircase, clinging to corners where the wallpaper peeled. It was not a tune anyone recognized, but it was a melody nonetheless, and it refused to leave. Dr. Harold Blecker was the first to take notice. Blecher had come not as a physician, but as a curious man of culture. He was known in Boston for his fascination with auditory hallucinations. When he heard whispers of a girl whose humming couldn't be transcribed, he took the next train south. He sat with Emma for hours. She never looked at him, just stared at the frost-laced window, humming to whatever waited beyond it. Blecher jotted notes furiously. He brought in others, a violinist, a blind music teacher from Maine, a young choir boy who claimed to hear God in water, and then came the composer. That's what he called himself. No name, no history, just the composer. He arrived with ink-stained fingers and eyes like spilled milk. He carried a leather case filled with yellowing manuscript paper and a broken metronome. He asked no questions, only sat beside Emma and closed his eyes. For hours. Then he began to notate, not in standard Western notation, not in any key known to modern theory. What emerged on the page resembled ancient cuneiform, a sprawling geometry of tone and tension. Someone whispered, "It looks like Babylon." Another replied, "No." And they were right. The melody, as the composer soon discovered, aligned perfectly with an ancient Sumerian tuning system, a mathematical construct lost for millennia, only recently unearthed by archaeologists studying temple ruins near Eridu. Scholars had barely begun to decode it. No modern instrument could reproduce it. But the composer tried. He found an old harmonium in the church basement, dusty, brittle, almost forgotten. With careful fingers, he tuned its reeds to match the Sumerian scale, and then in the candlelight of Emma's parlor, he played it. The first sound was soft, a sigh of breath through wood and metal. Then discord, not dissonance in the traditional sense. Something deeper, more anatomical. The sound seemed to strike the marrow. The cat bolted from the room. Down the hill a pack of stray dogs began howling in unison as if mourning something already dead. Mrs. Ellison, the cook, dropped her tray and wept without knowing why. Blecher clutched his chest and muttered, "It's not a song, it's a memory, trying to escape." The composer stopped playing. Emma smiled. It was the first time anyone had seen her smile in months. Then she wept. Not a child's sob, but a slow, deep grieving. Like something ancient had just moved through her. Something neither cruel nor kind, only eternal. They burned the sheet music that night. The composer vanished before dawn. No one spoke of the tuning again, but the melody lingered. In cracks, in shadows, in the hush before snowfall. Some swore the trees on Whitlow Hill began to lean, ever so slightly, toward the house. Richter, in his final notes before being institutionalized, she does not hum what she remembers. She remembers what she hums. The melody, it seems, had always been there.
Bleating.
Now it had found a voice, and Emma, for reasons no one could name, had become its instrument. The letter came in early October. Yellowed envelope. German postmark. Ink that bled through the paper like it had been waiting decades to be read. Inside, neat handwriting carefully translated. A woman named Lotte Kruger wrote from Bremen, claiming to be the granddaughter of a woman named Anneliese Richter. Her grandmother, she said, went silent at the age of 9. She began to hum. The letter read. No words. Only sound. At first it was pretty, then it wasn't. There were no recordings. Just memories passed like curses. Anneliese's family begged her to stop. They tried holy water, lavender, strips of cloth tied around her mouth at night. Nothing worked. She didn't want to hum, Lotte wrote, but she said it made her feel less alone. The story ended in ash. In 1902, a fire consumed the Richter house on the edge of Bremen. No survivors. No neighbors heard screams. Just humming, they said, carried on the wind like a lullaby for something that had never known rest. Investigators found melted nails, bones curled like question marks, and stone foundations scorched as if touched by something older than flame. There was no known connection to Emma, until the last line of the letter. It is not Emma, Lotte wrote. It is something that travels through blood, through sound, through silence. The words echoed through the study where Dr. Thomas Kessler sat reading. His hands trembled slightly. He was not a man easily shaken. Former professor of neuroacoustics at Heidelberg, veteran researcher, skeptic, always. But this made him lean back in his leather chair and stare at the window. Outside, a dog barked once and then fell quiet. The kind of silence that felt like a held breath. Kessler contacted shipping archives, chasing whispers through old manifests and passenger logs. A name resurfaced, the Hellenfahrt, a merchant vessel, vanished in 1792 somewhere in the Atlantic. Its name translated, ominously, to the journey to hell. The ship had long been presumed lost to storm or piracy, but in a forgotten drawer of the Hamburg Maritime Museum, someone had filed away a damaged manifest. And there, between flaking ink and mildew-stained parchment, one name had not faded. Emma Richter. Impossible, Kessler whispered. Just coincidence. But the date aligned, the age matched, and beneath the name, barely legible, someone had written one strange note in Latin. Cantus Hereticae. Memoriam ambulant. The heretic's song. A memory that walks. Kessler made calls. Colleagues turned cold. One archivist refused to speak once she heard the name. I've seen the melody, she said before hanging up. It's a gate. A gate to what? Meanwhile, Emma's humming continued. Longer now. Louder. A neighbor swore he heard it from 2 streets over, though the windows had been shut. A priest fainted during a home visit. Birds no longer perched on the house's eaves. The melody itself had begun to change. Not random. Not repetition. It was evolving. Becoming. At night, Emma slept with her eyes open. Once her mother caught her standing in the hallway at 3:11 a.m., smiling at nothing, just humming. When asked why, Emma simply said, "It's waiting for the others." Outside the town, the trees began losing their leaves early. The wind carried strange tones, dissonant chords with no source. Locals claimed their pets avoided certain roads, especially near the Richter house. One woman swore her daughter began to hum the same tune in her sleep after walking past it. She moved away 2 days later, and still, the melody went on. Not a song, not a dream, a story, unfolding without words, a memory, begging to be heard. The final testimony was not the letter. It was the silence that followed it. June 21st, 1874, the first day of summer. The sun rose over Hollow Creek like a sigh held too long, warm, silent, aching. Locals would later swear the light felt different. Not brighter, not darker, just wrong. Emma was seen that morning walking alone toward the edge of Ravenslock, her shawl trailing behind her like a shadow, reluctant to let go. She wore a white dress. Not new, not ceremonial, just a plain thing. Cotton, hand-stitched, hem slightly torn, but witnesses claimed it glowed. Mrs. Lillian Fraser, a neighbor, was hanging linens when she noticed the girl passing by. She wasn't walking, Lillian said. Not like normal folk. It was like watching someone step between here and somewhere else. Hollow Creek lay just beyond the fields, a shallow stream bordered by weeping willows and ironroot thorns. The town's children played there in spring, but none swam in summer, not since the drownings. Emma reached the water's edge around 8:11 a.m. according to the mill worker who saw her from his cart. She looked at the water, he said. Just stood there. Then the mist came, fast as breath on glass. The mist enveloped her, thick, rolling, cold, the kind that eats sound. And then she was gone. Not a splash, not a ripple, just vanished. They found her dress 3 hours later, dry and folded with impossible care on a flat stone beside the stream. There was no sign of Emma, no footprints leading away, no signs of struggle, not even the usual animal tracks. Just silence. Sheriff Edwin Kint took possession of the dress. He never spoke publicly about what he found folded inside it, but when his deputy asked, weeks later, about the strange markings drawn on the inner hem, the sheriff only muttered, "It wasn't stitched by her hands." The town changed after that. The air felt heavier. People began to leave. Her father boarded up the windows of the Ravenslock house and never returned. Her mother was last seen muttering hymns near the burned chapel. The town doctor relocated to Cincinnati. The priest simply disappeared. Then, in the spring of 1875, the storm came. Lightning tore through the valley like an executioner's blade. Fire swallowed rooftops. The post office collapsed. The church bell tower exploded into splinters. But amid the ash and ruin, Emma's room remained untouched. The wallpaper unpeeled, the bed unsinged, even the mirror remained intact, though those who dared to look into it after the fire claimed they saw someone else looking back. More than once travelers reported hearing humming from the blackened foundations of Ravenslock, a sound like breath caught in a lullaby, soft, inhuman, ancient. One survivor, a deaf woman named Clara Rounds, later wrote in a letter, "The melody haunts the ruins. I cannot hear it, but I feel it in my bones. Like a name I once knew and forgot. It wants to be remembered." By the end of 1875, the town was declared condemned. Officially, it had been ravaged by electrical fires, drought, and disease, but locals never rebuilt. They said the ground had memory, that some places do not forget the dead, or the vanished. The final document filed by county archivists in 1876 listed Ravenslock as erased by Providence, but it wasn't gone. Not entirely, because Emma's room, still untouched, continued to hum. Even now, beneath a canopy of thistle and vine, if you stand still enough and the wind is right, you might hear it too. Something soft, something lost, calling. It has been over a century since the last verifiable mention of Emma Richter. No obituary, no gravestone, no trace. Her medical records vanished in the 1930s fire that consumed the county's old sanatorium archives. Her doctor's descendants refused interviews, citing family shame and an oath not to stir old ghosts. The old Richter farmhouse was razed in 1947 after it stood empty for decades, windows boarded. Yet sometimes, neighbors swore they still heard humming. The only tangible thing left, if you can call it tangible, is a wax cylinder. It sits in the Allegheny County Historical Archives, filed under unknown, possibly German-American folk song. Unplayable. Except it is playable, if you know how. It was an archivist named Lowell Draper who found it. 1978. A pale man with hands that trembled even before the cylinder touched the player. It had no label, no name, no recording date, just a fragile spiral of brown-black wax, nested inside a tarnished tin box, wrapped in paper that had long since faded to bone white. He remembered the day he played it, and the moment afterward when he forgot his wife's name. It wasn't a song, he said. It wasn't even music. It was like a smell from childhood or a voice in the womb. Lowell stopped working soon after. Moved to a lighthouse in Maine. Left no forwarding address. Just a note, handwritten in crooked script. Emma was never a girl. She was a threshold. The wax cylinder still exists. Deep in the archives behind thick velvet curtains and under lock. Some believe it emits a low hum when no one's watching. Sound beneath sound. A forgotten key. One reporter who came to write a piece on Allegheni's forgotten curiosities described hearing the tune. "I didn't know I was hearing it at first," she wrote. "But later, I forgot the name of my sister's child. Then the password to my own home. Then my wedding anniversary. It's like it stole backwards." She never published the article. Today folklorists refer to Emma only in fragments. A mention in a handwritten letter from 1902. The girl who sang the devil's lullaby. A church ledger note from 1899. Exorcism requested. Denied. Unclear nature of affliction. A journal from a traveling musician. She hums in a tongue no man taught. I played it once on my harmonium. The sound unseated me for hours. But the melody, if that's even the right word, has no official name. It has no score. It has no rhythm. And yet, when played, it brings something forth. Something ancient. Or perhaps, something that was always here, waiting to be remembered. Some have theorized Emma's affliction was a rare case of cryptamnesia. Others argue it was a manifestation of shared trauma from a pre-modern society unable to grasp neurodivergence. But none of those theories explain why people keep forgetting, or why animals flee the sound, or why dreams change after hearing the wax recording. Dreams of vast, underground cities with black stone walls and skyless ceilings. Dreams of something large breathing behind them. What remains of Emma Richter is not a body, or a name, or even a story. It is the absence her story leaves behind. A space, a silence, a blank page in the collective memory. And that perhaps was the point all along. Emma was not a girl. She was a threshold, a question with no answer, a melody with no end, and memory that refuses to die. Some say there are frequencies too low for the human ear to detect, yet our bones remember them. Some say the universe hums in waves, and that ancient civilizations knew how to listen. Perhaps Emma was one of those listeners. Perhaps she heard something the rest of us were never meant to hear. Or maybe she became what she heard. Not every mystery needs solving. Not every story needs ending, because some stories are the ending. Emma Richter didn't vanish. She simply stepped sideways, through some crack in time, into some space between memory and music. And if you ever hear a hum in an empty room, one that makes your chest ache and your eyes sting, one that reminds you of something you never lived but somehow lost, you might have found her. Or maybe she found you.